Hi, this is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I am here with another 2023 reading wrap-up video. This one is my top 10 novels of the year. Now, specifically, my top 10 adult novels. I have separate categories for young adult and middle grade, and I read plenty of great novels in those categories as well. But my focus today is just on adult novels. I had a lot of trouble narrowing it down to only 10. My first cut was 15, and every one of those 5 that I cut off to get to 10 was like a stab in the heart. So understand these are the very top 10, the way I feel about them today. There are lots of other very amazing books that I read in the year. I'm going to start with my top 2, and then the rest are just in alphabetical order. The best book I read last year, hands down, was also one of the first books I read, and that is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. Oh, this book is just so amazing. And I listened to it on audio, and I did name it. If you saw my other video with my top picks in each category, I named it my best audiobook of the year. If you haven't read it yet, definitely check out the audio because the narrator is amazing. It is completely immersive. It took me a full month to listen to this audiobook. Usually takes me like a week and a half to 2 weeks. And I got to the end and I was so sad that it was over, and I never wanted it to end. That's the sign of a good book. And there are a lot, that's kind of the criteria I use to narrow things down for the rest of this stack. Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. She's one of my favorite authors, but she has outdone herself. I think it's her best ever. It is about a young boy growing up in southwestern Virginia in Appalachia. It deals with the opioid crisis very significantly. It deals with death and loss, the foster care system, but it is also so incredibly funny. And you may have heard, or you may be able to tell from the title, it's a modern take on David Copperfield. You don't have to have read David Copperfield. If you have, then it's like there are some extra Easter eggs there for you, but outstanding book. Highly recommend it. Definitely read it this year if you didn't last year. And right up at the top, what I named my top novel of the year, because I kind of like to spread things out, The Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles. An amazing road trip book set in the 50s. It's a coming-of-age novel about 4 young men who are about 18, and one of them has a younger brother named Billy, who's 10. The 5 of them set off on this epic journey, and that's really what this book is all about. Billy has this compendium of hero stories, this huge hardcover book that he carries around with him. That tells you a lot about the character. And that's what this is. It is a hero's journey. It's fascinating historical fiction, but also the characters just come to life. The dialogue is fabulous. Billy is an amazing character, as are the other 4. I misspoke earlier. It's 3 18-year-olds and 10-year-old Billy. So there are 4 of them all together. Just outstanding book. I loved his A Gentleman in Moscow. I can't compare the 2. They're entirely different books. But while this is an entirely different story, it has the same heart and humor and so many passages that I marked that I wanted to remember. Highly recommend The Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles. You may have already noticed that many of these are huge books. This is I didn't read them all during Big Book Summer, but certainly this is a great advertisement for my annual challenge. If you haven't participated in the past, I hope you will this summer. It runs from end of June to early September. The idea is just to read a bigger book or two, or however many you want. And a big book is anything 400 or more pages. This was the first book I read for Big Book Summer. Stephen King's latest at the time, Billy Summers. Just outstanding. If you don't like horror, this is not horror. There is no horror in it. There is a fair amount of thriller action in the last third of the novel. And the main character, the title character, is a hitman. But the first 2/3 of the novel, the whole novel really is very much a character study. And there's not a whole lot of action or violence in the first 2/3. You just get to know Billy, this hitman who intends to do one last job and then retire. Stephen King is so talented when it comes to creating characters, making them feel real and three-dimensional. Billy Summers was outstanding. Definitely made it into my mental list of best Stephen King books ever, my favorites. Another Big Book Summer read and my top classic of the year, and it had some competition. I read some great classics this year. The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Obviously, it's a classic. I had read it in high school, but rereading it, I was just blown away. Obviously, he's a good writer. I mean, he's a classic for a reason, but this novel has so much compassion. There's a lot that happens in the plot, but it's very much about the characters and the people, while also pulling back and giving you a wider view of history, of what was going on historically at the time in this region during the Dust Bowl in the U.S. that created the situation for this family. Outstanding book. It's reminded me why I've always said that I love John Steinbeck. We did read quite a bit of him in high school, but definitely need to revisit and read more. My very first book of the year, and it remained a favorite through the whole year, Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. While I was listening to Demon Copperhead, I was reading this in print. January was an amazing reading month for me. And, I just loved it for all the reasons everybody else loves it. It's a story with a lot of emotional depth about a woman chemist in the 50s and 60s trying to make her way in what was very much a man's world. But at the same time, this book is hilariously funny. Laugh out loud funny. My husband and I both read the TV adaptation on Apple TV. Watched the TV adaptation together. He hadn't read the book. We both loved the TV show, but they changed quite a bit. And what the TV show is really missing is, and this sounds weird, but trust me, it works, the voice of Elizabeth's dog, 630. I know it sounds like a gimmick. It's not here. It works perfectly. Some of the narration is from 630's perspective. You know what he's thinking in his doggy thoughts. It's hilarious. So some serious topics covered here, including sexual assault, sexual discrimination, death of a loved one, but also very, very funny. You will see that is a common thread here. I love a book that deals with serious topics, but also makes me laugh. And speaking of books dealing with serious topics that also make me laugh, Rabbit Cake by Annie Hartnett, my very last book of the year, also made my top 10. And I had some trouble here because I also read her novel Unlikely Animals earlier in the year. It was a toss-up which would make my top 10 list. They were both favorites this year, but ultimately I chose Rabbit Cake. By the way, I finished Rabbit Cake on December 30th this year. So this is Exhibit A of why I do not make my best of the year list until the very end of the year. This was worth waiting for. So this is a story about a family's grief. It is narrated, it's from the point of view of 10-year-old Elvis, a young girl who loses her mother right at the beginning. Her mother is a sleepwalker and sleep swimmer, which apparently is a thing. I looked it up. And right at the beginning, usually they keep an eye on her mom while she's sleepwalking. This time, somehow she got out of the house. They live right near the river. She went swimming in her sleep like she usually does, only this time she drowned. So the novel is all about Elvis, her 15-year-old sister Lizzie, and their father learning to cope with this horrible loss in the middle of their life that left a big hole in their lives. It's about the grieving process and how each person grieves separately. There is so much that happens in this novel plot-wise. It is not an interior novel. Lizzie in particular is going through she's also a sleepwalker. She starts sleep eating, stealing eggs from local chicken coops. Things get pretty crazy. And that is a characteristic of Annie Hartnett's work, of what I've read so far. She deals with very serious topics, but with a quirkiness and a sense of humor that you just fall in love with these characters. It was the same with Unlikely Animals. She's created such wonderful, lovable, though flawed characters, and I just really came to love them. Again, one of my criteria was I was sorry when it ended. I did not want to leave this family behind, even though by the end, they are healing and coming back together. Outstanding book, Rabbit Cake by Annie Hartnett. Now this next one is an unusual pick for me from my top 10. A Solitude of Wolverines by Alice Henderson. Now, I love reading thrillers and mysteries. However, they don't usually make it on my top 10. Because, as you've seen from my other choices, I really like a book with a lot of emotional depth, that deals with some serious issues, with a sense of humor. Usually that is not thrillers. This thriller, however, when it came down to narrowing those last 15 down to just 10, this stayed on the list because I never wanted it to end. And I finished it and wanted to immediately read her second book, which is called A Blizzard of Polar Bears. We have it here, but I was saving it for winter because of the title and the theme. So what sets Alice's series apart is that it's not about a detective or a lawyer or a private investigator. It's about a wildlife biologist, a woman named Alex Carter. And in this first novel, we find Alex reeling from a breakup, narrowly missed in a shooting, so really shook up emotionally. So there's some of that emotional depth that I like. She is contacted the same day of the shooting, actually, to travel to Montana to do a wildlife study of wolverines, to find out, basically an environmental study, to find out how many wolverines are on this huge tract of land that was recently donated by an old ski resort, and is now supposed to be wildland. So what follows is not only outstanding mystery thriller as people begin to die on the land. And Alex, while she's studying the Wolverines, is trying to figure out what's going on and finds herself in the middle of all of this. But I loved the natural setting. I love the outdoors and nature and wildlife. I've really been enjoying following Alice Henderson on Twitter, X, so recommend that. So I loved that setting, the natural setting. It's got the mystery thriller. There's some emotional complexity. Plus, it was fascinating. I learned so much about Wolverines, which just in the last couple of months were just designated an endangered species. So I'm so glad that I read this, that I learned about Wolverines, that I went through this story along with Alex, and I can't wait to go on her next adventure. Okay, number 9. And remember, that's alphabetical, not in order of what I like the best. I had enough trouble choosing 10. I could never number them. Was Upgrade by Blake Crouch. I'm a huge fan of Blake Crouch's sci-fi thrillers. So another thriller that made it onto my list, but for a reason. So his thrillers are always set in the real world. They're science fiction, but set in the real world, basically taking real life science and positing what if. My favorite of his is Dark Matter, which is here on this shelf somewhere. This is our keeper shelf, the shelf of our favorite books. And I know Dark Matter is on here, as is Recursion, his 2 earlier novels. Dark Matter was my favorite. I think it still is, but Upgrade was a really close runner-up. This one is about genetic modification and what can happen when this technology that could do a lot of good in the world gets into the wrong hands. So it's set in a near future, present day, but near future, where things have gotten out of control. There's been a horrible famine in the world that was created by genetic modification, unintentionally, of course. And so all genetic modification has been outlawed. The main character here now, he used to be a genetic scientist. He was recruited for the new GPA, Genetic Protection Agency. And his job is to seek out scientists who are still doing genetic research or experiments and stop them. But he finds himself experimented on without his knowledge. And he begins to evolve at a very fast rate. Mentally, physically, this is kind of like the next evolution of humanity. So it is a fabulous thriller, but what propelled it onto my top 10 list is what I always love about Blake Crouch, and a lot of the science fiction that I really love falls into this category. It's thought-provoking. It really makes you think about our own world, about possibilities, about what is happening, what could happen, about the ramifications. So I love a sci-fi novel that makes you think. And in addition, this was a page-turning, fast-paced thriller that I could not put down. And wrapping up my top 10 alphabetically is Voyager by Diana Gabaldon. So, at first I sort of overlooked this because I thought, oh yeah, this is the 3rd book of hers I've read. They're always really great. I always enjoy them. Another big book summer book, my longest. Took me a month to read it. But then I remembered my criteria. This is helping me narrow things down so much. This book, book 3 in her Outlander series, is 870 pages. And it took me a month to read it, and I got to the end and was just distraught that it had ended. Now, normally, if it takes you a month to read a book, You're ready to move on. Very often, even if you enjoyed it, you're ready for something different. No, I finished those 870 pages and immediately, within minutes, began reading the short excerpt at the end of book 4. I did not want to leave these characters behind. And in this case, as much as I love this series, I think this is my favorite so far because it is action-packed, but not as much war action as the last one. The title is very descriptive. Part of it does take place in Scotland, part of it in France, but much of it takes place on a long voyage that Jamie and Claire make across the Atlantic from Scotland to the Caribbean. And there are so many plot twists here, so many unexpected things that you did not see coming. Of course, I always love the time travel aspect, but this is just a fabulous adventure novel. A page turner, even at 870 pages, and I never wanted it to end. I can't wait to read book 4 in Big Book Summer this year. So that is my top 10 in fiction, adult fiction for this year. I want to hear what you enjoyed reading in 2023. Let me know in the comments down below. What were your top fiction reads of the year last year? The ones that just blew you away, that have stuck in your mind, that you never wanted to end. Tell me about it in the comments below. And take a moment to like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel so we can stay in touch.